Hello everyone and welcome to another video on tanking. Last time we looked at why it was awesome to be a tank. This time we're looking at the flip side. We're looking at why it sucks to be a tank. No, it doesn't really suck in general. The gameplay of tanking is not what I'm really going to get at in this, and the biggest reason why it sucks to be a tank, it's not anything to do with us, it's other players, in particular DPS. That's why it sucks to be a tank. DPS players who just don't have a clue either how to play their class or how to play in a group, which is the worst thing we can get, is DPS who just don't have a clue how to play in a group or are just oblivious to what's going on around them. You know, we get several different types of DPS. I should really do a video, a more in-depth video on the different types of DPS that we get. We get the type which we hate as tanks are the impatient ones. They're the most obvious ones, the ones that decide, oh, tank's taking too long, I'm gonna pull. And there could be a reason for that. I mean, there's a reason why we might take some time. Maybe our defensive cooldowns are, you know, still coming off cooldown. Maybe our like charge is on cooldown. Maybe my saber throw is on cooldown and I'm just waiting, you know, 2 or 3 seconds for that to come off cooldown. And the idiot, let's not call them an idiot, let's call them marauders, because having leveled 2 tank classes, it is everything they say about marauders is true, and everything I've said about marauders is, all my marauder hate is justified. Let's put it that way. I added about 40 people to my ignore list while I was leveling this tank. At least 30 of them were marauders. Only one healer, mind you. One healer, a couple of assassins, which we'll get to later. Only one healer, one bad healer I encountered in my whole time leveling a tank. So healers aren't the problem, it's DPS that are a big problem, and they create a hell of a lot of problems for both the tank and the healer. We'll talk a little bit more about healing and its upsides and its downsides in the later videos, but as a tank we really hate these impatient pulls, these impatient pullers, because we have things to manage. What if things are on cooldown for us? I wait for things to come off cooldown. The other reason I don't pull straight away is if I see the healer is low on resources, I'll wait for the healer, you know, to build back up the resources, because you can see the resource bar underneath their health bar the way I have it with the raid frame setup. That's why I use the raid frame, because it clearly shows us what the healer, especially if you have a sorcerer or sage healer who are quite sensitive to the resources. Their force is very kind of sensitive to them. They really can't do any healing at all if they have low force. Their healing is really affected by that. Other healers you can be a bit faster with, like the operative or the scoundrel. They're pretty fast. The mercenary is another one, commandos as well. You can be pretty fast with them because they're not as resource sensitive as the sorcerer. So you always want to check, because if you see a sorcerer with, like, you know, 70% force, I tend to wait, let them get their force regenerated before we pull next, you know, or wait until I'm waiting for the healer to be ready. The way I know a healer's ready is if I have static barrier on me, or if I have Kolto shell or 2 stacks of the slow release med pack. That's how you know a healer's ready. That's how I let the tanks know anyway, when I'm a healer, that I'm ready to go. If I have full resources and I have, you know, some sort of damage prevention or some sort of pot on the tank, I'm ready. I'm ready for the tank to pull. You know, you hate it as a healer as well when you're still regenning your resource and DPS is pull. It really ruins the fight, because again, you're trying to get the mobs into position as well. You're trying to get them into position to make the life easier for the DPS. You're trying to create that little ball of death, essentially, that the DPS can just drop their AoE on top of. That's what you're trying to do as a tank. You're trying to get all the enemies into one sort of easy to kill position. That's your goal. And a DPS pulling just ruins that. It just ruins that whole thing for you. It's really annoying to come across these DPS that do this, and I really hate that. The other one is, of course, We all know this kind, the CC breaker. Yeah, again, you'll get someone, maybe an operative, will CC one of the enemies, stealth CC just before the pull, or you'll see like, you know, a sorcerer casting their whirlwind on a specific enemy, or you'll mark an enemy for CC and you'll see a sorcerer with their whirlwind in mid cast. I tend to go and pull the other mobs when they're midway through casting, so that the sorcerer healer doesn't get a lot of aggro and doesn't take a lot of damage, at least. So I go and pull while their CC is firing off and try to get the mobs away from the CC'd one. But no, of course, what does your marauder do? We're just gonna call them marauders because that's the majority of them. They're idiots. What does your marauder do? Jumps right at the one you've marked. The one we've marked, we've not marked it for you. Okay, whenever we mark enemies, we're marking them for CC, unless we mark them with a target generally. If an enemy is marked with a target, generally that means kill, but if we mark it with a star or a lightsaber or whatever, don't kill that enemy. That's the one we're gonna CC. Okay, that is the one that we're gonna CC. Now as tanks, we don't have CCs. Well, two of us don't. The assassin does. The assassin has the stealth CC. We have mind control. So we are the other two tanks, the Juggernaut and the Power Tech, cannot CC anything. So we're relying on others to CC, and sometimes you mark a target and say CC that target. Nobody does it. No one does it. And it's one of the reasons why we don't like to queue for Group Finder, and it's also one of the reasons why your Group Finder queues take forever, because we just don't want to put up with you. We just don't want to put up with bad DPS. And the third and final one, and this one really annoys me because this is kind of basic stuff, is kill order. They're just oblivious to kill order. DPS that are just so oblivious to it. It is really annoying that your kill order as DPS is weak, normal, strong, elite, champion. That is your kill order. It's always silver, gold, and what we'll call it the exploding star. You've got little silver stars are your strongs, gold stars are elites, and the kind of exploding star is your champion. Champions are usually bosses, but again, we always want to be killing the weaker enemies first. And the reason for this is, as a tank, we don't want to have to pick up the weaker enemies, because, and we shouldn't have to, because every single DPS has an ability or abilities that can stun weaker enemies. You know, every single class. Marauders, you have Smash, stuns 4 weak enemies. You know, make use of that. You have Force Scream as well. Bounty Hunters, you've got your Explosive Dart, you've got your Missile Blast that knock people down. You don't need to be tanked because the DPS can deal with them. They can use their AoE like Death from Above, which knocks all the weak enemies down in that field, in the AoE field. It's so annoying that you get the elite and you get the 2 strong enemies. The classic example of this is Foundry, where you have an elite, 2 strongs, and 4 normal enemies, 4 kind of normal with no star or anything like that on them. As a tank, we get aggro, we get threat on the elite, we leap at the elite, and we try and get the 2 strong enemies to come to us, and we deal with those 2. We deal with those 3, and the DPS should take care of the other adds. What happens is the DPS go and attack the strong enemy, or they attack the elite, and they leave the weak enemies up. And what do the weak enemies do? Guess who they attack? Yeah, they attack the healer, don't they? Of course they do. Another example is Boarding Party. I've been in some really bad groups where all the DPS and the tank attack the boss on the second boss with the 2 adds, and don't bother with the 2 adds. So what do the 2 adds do? Guess what they do? Come and kill me as the healer, and then I get the blame for not healing. One tank blamed me for not healing, and it's like, yeah, it's very hard to heal while I'm dead, you know. And again, we blame the DPS for this. The tank should have been aware that the DPS are at fault here, because the DPS should be getting rid of those adds, and they're not doing it. No, they're never doing it. It's so frustrating. It's frustrating as a healer, it's frustrating as a tank as well, because the healer's taking damage, so the healer's not healing us as effectively as they should be, because they're trying to deal with adds They're trying to either heal themselves or kill the ads, and they're wasting their own resources with doing this because you're not doing your job properly. And it's very, very simple to DPS. You have the easiest job essentially there. You know, the tank, we have so much to worry about. We have our threat to worry about, we have our defenses to worry about. The healer has everyone's health to worry about, particularly the tank. But that's the thing about DPS. The other thing we're going to touch on, and this is something that seems to be happening to me a lot recently, is the knockbacks. My god, do we hate knockbacks. DPS who just push the mobs away from us as a tank. Thanks. I've done all this work to get a little death ball. The you know, we've got a sorcerer who's got their force force storm out. You've got your agent who's maybe got an orbital strike going, and you've got an assassin DPS who decides, you know what, I want to get in this AoE, I'm going to use overload and push all the enemies out of the AoE. Happens a lot in Kuat drive yards. Really annoys me the amount of times I've been using mortar strike on my commando and someone's pushed all of the mobs out of it. Like, what the hell are you doing? My AoE is going to do more damage than yours. So why are you pushing them out of my AoE, just doing more damage, which is going to kill them quicker? Hate that about DPS. You just got to be aware of the group situation. Be aware that, you know, your actions have consequences, and if you play your class right, you'll get better groups, you'll get better Q pops as DPS. If DPS always say, oh, the Q takes, you know, I'm waiting an hour in the group finder queue. Why are you waiting an hour in the group finder queue? If you're not playing your class correctly or not playing your role correctly, you are pissing off tanks. And when a tank gets pissed off, you go on ignore. Okay, you go on ignore. That's what happens. The amount of times that you tell people, I just gave up in the end with telling people what to do and say, screw it, you know. There's no point in telling people because no one's going to learn. But the good thing about being a tank is that you really don't have to put up with these bad DPS. You can vote kick them. And if the vote kick fails, you can just leave yourself and get a group instantly. Pretty much instantly. You can just get out of the group and just, or you get the strategic DC tank. I've seen that a few times, the strategic DCer. That's always pretty fun. Just log out, just rage quit the game, and you get your strategic disconnect. I don't recommend doing that. That is a bit kind of douchey. You know, let them know why you're leaving if you're gonna leave, and tell them, you know, you're doing it wrong. If you want to play with a tank, which you have to unless you're doing tactical flashpoints, and it's the same with group finder operations. Even with the new bolster, you tend to find that the limiting factor, as BioWare have said themselves, is the tanks. And the reason for this is we just don't want to queue for pugs. You know, you get your character in to a certain gear level, and you have, so the only people left in the queue is the kind of under-geared tanks. That's the problem as well. So people who complain about the tanks being under-geared, bear in mind that geared tanks do not want to do it. Do not want to group with you, because most of the geared tanks and most of the good tanks are in guilds or are snapped up by guilds. So they have a place on a raiding team. A good tank always has a place on a raiding team because they're essential to the team, and they can always pick and choose who they want to go, who they want to do flashpoints with. So you'll always want to do flashpoints. In our guild, you know, we have good tanks, and you know, you're always doing flashpoints with them if you can as a healer or DPS, because we just avoid the pug groups, or we get a chance to pick good healers that we know and good DPS that we know from your guild and or from your friends list. So if you see a good DPS, you should add them to your friends list as well. I always think that. I think I added about 4 or 5 people. I added about 40 people to my ignore list. You always add more to ignore than you do friends. I always find that. But yeah, I mean, you still encounter good players. The standard has gone down a lot in terms of player quality since 2.0, or since free-to-play, to be honest with you. Since free-to-play launched, the standard has gone down a hell of a lot. Whether that's BioWare's fault or not for driving all the good players away from the game, Who knows, but I'm finding that hard mode flashpoints are a lot harder these days, and I'm in much better gear than I was. You're always in in better gear than I've ever been, and sometimes we struggle to down bosses because we hit in rage. Even in a level 50 HM, we're hitting in rage on some bosses because the DPS are just struggling. They're not struggling for damage output, they just tend to die often by standing in stupid things, and doing stupid things is what it tends to be. It's not the raw damage output. I'm going to have a discussion about DPS and whether we should be judging DPS purely on damage output. I think that's a video for another time. But anyway, we've ranted on about the different types of DPS. We very rarely come across a bad healer though. It is a very rare sight that we come across a healer, at least on the Red Eclipse anyway, that you come across a healer who is just a DPS that wants a quick queue time. You get that. I've heard of that quite a bit, but I've never actually seen it. Never actually witnessed it. A bad healer, really. It's very rare. Healers are pretty good in this game, actually. We're pretty decent as healers, and healers get a lot, and DPS get a lot. I wish they would show some love for tanks, though. We should really make tanks awesome, and make tanks better to encourage people, and that is another discussion. How can we improve tanking would be a thing to say to BioWare. Can you improve tanking so that more people want to roll a tank? Because a lot of times I enjoyed being a tank, I have to say. I wouldn't have done 2 in a row, I wouldn't have leveled 2 in a row if I didn't enjoy it ultimately, but yeah, I think being a tank does have its advantages and it does have its disadvantages. Ultimately though, you have to say that the disadvantages are quite off-putting, but we can get around them by just ignoring people. And again, I would say to you, if you're a DPS class, respect the tank, respect the healer, okay, because they're doing the hard work while you have fun. Essentially, you're killing the thing and we're working. You know, we're working to keep the healer, trying to keep everyone alive, and the tank is trying to keep everyone away from the healer, kind of thing. But so you need to show a bit of respect for tanks and healers. Don't push things away from the tank, because you're just going to annoy them. You're just going to end up on ignore eventually, and it's bad for the game really, because we drive away potentially good DPS players because of the lack of tanks and healers in the game, essentially, especially for the hard mode flashpoints. The queue times are ridiculous for them, for DPS. I think they're ridiculous, but again, it's just the majority, or it may be the minority. I would say that's the majority, to be honest, because of what I've come across, that it's more rare. It's, again, we added what, 4 people to our friends list and 40 people to my ignore list. So I would say that, again, maybe in you know, leveling is maybe the problem for tanks and healers. Maybe it's the Kuat Drive Yards mentality that's got into DPS players, and they just think that, hey, it's just another flashpoint, I can just go pull everything and I'll be fine. You won't. Because that's another thing, if you pull as DPS, I'm not taunting off you. I'm gonna watch you die. And if I'm healing and the DPS pulls, no heals for you. You're not getting healed. You might get AoE healed, but you're not getting any active healing from me. Nope, none whatsoever from me. So that is all for this video. Again, if you like tanking, let me know your experience. You know, share your experiences of pug groups and tanking. It'll be interesting when we start pugging ops. I have to confess, I've never ever pugged an op as a tank, to be honest with you. I did a Friday Night Pug where I was a tank, but I knew some of the people that were in that. I knew most of them. I've never done a pug tank. They've always been guild runs, and there's a reason for that, and you know the reason. We just explained it in this video. So I've never done it. I might do a Friday Night Pugs one night on Twitch with a tank. We'll just queue for an operation with a group if I'm feeling brave or stupid enough. So that's all for this video. So thank you for joining me, and I think we'll look at healing next time. We'll talk about why it's awesome to be a healer, and we'll talk about why it's bad to be a healer. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.
waited for 1,000 years. They will slay you and return to the stars.